So I'm going to take about 25 minutes just talking through digital transformation, but also around kind of how that's driving new work styles in IT, around things like changing workplaces, but also alongside things like cybersecurity threats and how that's also impacting probably the pace of change around things like IT. My name is Ben Threllfal, as you can see up there. I look after all our alliance partnerships within EMEA, so anything from kind of the GSIs we work with and referral partners and technology partners. Be good just before I start to get a kind of basis of show of hands of who has ever heard of Box. Fantastic. Who has actually used Box? Okay, great. So I'll try and make sure it sort of works for all of the audience in terms of the kind of knowledge and information that I talk through. So just wanted to kind of start with a more comical note around, I kind of love this image talking about, actually how organisations are devising strategies for change and believing that they have to bring in experts to kind of make that change, but actually it's fundamental that users are taken along that journey. So if we kind of apply this, things like, kind of the move to content management or around sync and share, people are already using this in their personal life. It might be kind of, freemium accounts out there, and actually they have a good awareness of that, but not always do organisations take that to account and think it's going to be too painful to make that change. So we're hearing the term at the moment, edge companies. These are companies that really understand how digital transformation can help them both from employee experience, but also along the lines of making their customers' lives more satisfied and improving that experience with their customers. Whether it's around applications they provide out to them, classic example of those. I travel a lot at the moment. The BA app I think is fantastic. There's no more paper required. I pretty much know every booking I've got. I occasionally get updates. That's the only kind of miss on when flights are delayed and things like that. But I have instant access to that information and I don't need to speak to somebody through that. But it's also forcing companies to work through those kind of disruptive changes or disruptive thinking. Whether it might be external challenges they're facing from competitors, or it's actually taking the organisation through that particular change. So classic companies that have done this, and very much they've had an advantage because they are new to the market. So the way that they've probably worked around digital transformation is they've built very much from the start of that basis. But they've been incredibly successful. I mean, if you look at the likes of Uber, hands in the air, who hasn't used Uber? There we are. So everybody's using Uber, and it pretty much 9 times out of 10, it is a fantastic experience, and they're dominating that market. And now they're moving into new markets, so they are trying to get into the corporate market and the big enterprise accounts. So automatically, the likes of Addison Lee are under threat from companies like Uber, who are giving end customers that fantastic experience already, and they're kind of behind the curve. Airbnb. That really has transformed the hotel market as we see it today, and that's very much through that digital experience. And Netflix, no longer is it kind of DVDs, I'm sort of stating the obvious, but it's about streaming information, and for a very low price point you can have access to the latest movies and films wherever you are. So if we take the example of Uber, because it's a very interesting one, is Uber doesn't actually own any of its own technology. So it works with lots of different technology partners to be able to provide that. And some of this will probably correlate with the experiences that you've had. So if we talk about the infrastructure, it's built on Amazon Web Servers. If we talk about the mapping, Google Mapping is everything behind it that both the drivers are using, but also the information you're looking at when you're waiting for your taxi to arrive or understanding the route that they're taking. And also the communications that carry out between end user, but also the drivers is done by Twilio. The payment system is done by Braintree, and the emails that you get around the statements, because there's no longer need to payment, comes through SendGrid. And also Box is working with Uber around this, where we do with a lot of the onboarding of the drivers. So there are legal terms and conditions that they need to sign up to. There's also certain information that they need to know if they're going to be part of Uber and part of that kind of driving experience. And you can imagine that for them, because these might be people that have never actually driven a taxi before, or they've worked for larger taxi companies, but they wouldn't be able to access that information without a simple external collaboration experience. Good. So some information here from the Harvard Business Review, which is talking about digital disruption over the next 12 months. And what you'll see from that is there's more traditional organisations in there, the likes of, say, wealth management, to maybe more technology advanced or more technology embracing organisations, the likes of media and that type of thing. Now, what's interesting around that is change is being forced upon them, because it might be external factors like their competition. So if you look at wealth management, organisations like Facebook and Google are starting to launch funds to the market. Now, the traditional wealth management model is that they will work through agents who actually have that relationship with the end customer. So how do they know about their end customers? The likes of Google and Facebook, these guys are using it in their personal life. They know everything about them. They know, who their friends are, they know what they like, that type of thing. And that causes a challenge and that necessary kind of disruption that maybe is embracing or making them make that change. Education, which is a very close one to my heart. I have 2 children. They are 6 and 8 years old. My eldest child, probably around 50 or 60% of what he does is digital. So, it will be maths on applications, and he gets rewards around that. He then sees what percentile he is against all the other children using that around the world, so you can kind of get a good basis. So bringing that to education. Every update I get, so, pretty boring, but his cricket match was cancelled today. That was a digital communication through to me, a secure digital communication. So it really is starting to change in education as well. And we work with many organisations ourselves around that and helping them with that change. And I think, Telecom One is kind of one that's very well known as well. They are really moving to provide you more cloud services rather than just the traditional basic stuff, which is being commoditized, as in, can you make a mobile phone call or can make a fixed line call, that type of thing. Good. So just some statistics here, nearly 2 billion mobile workers by 2020. So what's important around that is it means a lot more of people's working life, a lot more of the processes they carry out on a day-to-day basis will continue, and even more so be away from the office. So have they really got access to the information they need to make those decisions in a simple way? Over $400 billion is lost in cybersecurity attacks annually. We've seen some big highlighted ones around that, things around Sony, obviously that was one that was a big profile one, things around FBI and stuff like that. So it is a major problem, and sometimes the unfortunate thing around these things is that particular instance has to happen, or that issue has to happen, and then people start making that change. Another one obviously being very recently the Volkswagen scandal around emissions and that type of thing. So those legacy approaches just won't continue to work, and that's a really important point. There are certain things that organisations have to keep highly secure. It might be within the banking community, or it might be governments and that type of thing. But if they really are going to improve and continue to improve that experience with their customers and their employees, they have to embark upon that digital transformation. And I have some of my colleagues at the back in here today, and I would doubt there's ever a company that they engage with who aren't looking at around kind of C-suite or CIO level that actual digital transformation. Be at different stages along that path, but it is a key initiative for them over the coming year to 2 years. So where we're starting to see it already, and this is all about left-hand side, which is very much about kind of, let's think of on-premise is probably the simplest way to look at it, and then moving to the cloud. If we look at, very much around that, Office 365, most organisations are either aware of or starting to embark on the deployment of Office 365. I heard a statistic the other day, I think it's in Benelux or something like that, of all enterprise customers, so that's anything I think they class as above 1,000 employees, there's about a 90% penetration. So they're actually embarking on taking Office 365 or moving those particular applications to the cloud. CRM, Salesforce.com, they have been a big disruptor in the market, moving from kind of more of the legacy on-premises, the likes of Siebel and those guys, and they've sort of really started to revolutionise that market, and very much around the capability they then deliver to customers through their kind of applications and continued development. Workday, might not all have heard of Workday, but this is very much around a kind of a people, I suppose, operations application that you use, so everything from days off, expenses, that type of thing. And ERP, NetSuite's a common one around that we hear about in terms of moving that capability to the cloud. But the key thing around this is it's already there. And when people talk about moving to the cloud and the kind of nervousness around it, and that also depends on different geographies and how they're kind of open they are or how aware they are of the cloud, actually they're already making this move. Their data is already leaving and leaving behind their firewalls, and it's being stored in the cloud. But critically, it's being stored securely in the cloud. And compute, a last one around IBM Cloud. These guys really are making that shift from on-premise to the cloud. So those kind of old legacy products and trying to move their customer base towards that. So content management, and this is really talking more about the field that Box plays in. We call ourselves a modern content management platform. So I'll kind of allude a bit more around that, but also how that applies to digital transformation. Okay. So this is really just giving you a landscape of more of the kind of legacy setup that we have, and you can see straight away many different types of products that are being used there, and actually within that IT environment, how adopted are they? And this causes massive challenges. I mean, number one, you've got a complicated user experience there, and therefore are people really ever going to use those particular solutions, whether it's what you're providing to them for microsites or whether it's document storage. And therefore that brings on to the next point, which is, if they aren't, how are they sharing information? Is it still via email and attachments, or is shadow IT starting to play into that? Are they using consumer tools out there, the likes of Dropbox, which then when the information leaves your company and is within Dropbox and people are sharing it, you have no visibility of that. You don't know what's happening with that information. You might know how sensitive it is, but you don't know who it's been passed on to, what people are collaborating on that information. It's also very costly maintained because you're going to have different service agreements, you will have different development costs behind this to make sure that you're trying to move that product into the future of the IT you're providing to your customers, to your employees. And also, you've got content sprawl. Where is that information being stored? And what is primarily being used as a document dump? So just building on that and kind of how Box moves into that landscape, the key thing is that we build Box cloud first and mobile first. And what I mean by that is that the user experience on the mobile application is as similar as possible as it can be on the desktop and the web browser. And therefore you can carry out lots of those tasks that you might have traditionally done in the office or not had enough information to do remotely whilst you're out in the field. To give you a kind of simple example of that, Box has a preview capability where we can preview up to 130 different file types. So that means you don't need the native application on the mobile device, you do that through Box. So you can actually review that information, you can comment into that information and be collaborating with people on that information. It connects to all your business applications. So take the example of some of them here, DocuSign, electronic contract signature. Taking away the need for paper signatures, you sign on through DocuSign application, that automatically uploads back into Box and it date stamps and puts that into a folder where you then have visibility and you can share that amongst departments. You could think of great use cases around that, being it recruitment, being it legal, being it PR announcements, that type of thing. It brings centralized security control because the content is being stored in one particular area. So that's being stored in Box, but you're accessing it through all of those different applications. So if I take the example of Salesforce and a very large organization we work with, one of the biggest challenges they had is they had around 16 different instances of Salesforce because different business divisions have made a decision in different geographies to purchase Salesforce. The challenge around that is that if you're working on a global bid in another country, how do you access that information? So using that integration to Box, it's now one central point for that information. So if somebody's working on a big tender and it's covering multiple countries, they have access simply to that information. And you don't need to worry about storage costs. If I look at how the kind of market has evolved over time, I'm kind of the age when people were paying a lot of money to companies for storage, just storing documents. And there still are companies that do that today, where, if you need more terabytes of data or you need more gigabytes of storage, you're paying additional costs around that. And then it's kind of moved into the file sync and share space, which is the very simple case of putting your information in one place and sharing it amongst people. And now people are looking at actually far more about what they can do with that information. Can they carry out meaningful workflows? Can they carry out meaningful business processes behind that? Okay. So just a quick overview of Box. Obviously these statistics sort of tell you first of all that we are a serious company in enterprise and strategic size accounts with the number of customers we have at 62,000, but the percentage of Fortune 500. And they are reliant on Box. If they can't access a document, we're going to know about it because they're then preventing somebody from doing their job or carrying out a process. I'll just pick on a few of the use cases and not unfortunately knowing enough about all the different verticals you guys are in. I've just tried to pick the ones that are more interesting and more complicated. So Eurostar is a very interesting one because they came to us about actually a train driver application. This wasn't just we need somewhere to put our information. We need an application that will provide our train drivers, both online and offline, because obviously the issues they're going to have around coverage, with access to the necessary information to do their jobs. So be it health and safety manuals, be it disaster recovery, be it what do you do in this situation, if there's a passenger issue, that type of thing. But they have lots of information, so they still need to be able to search for that offline. Key use case around that. Other things that they were doing is that they use an application that we have called Box Capture, which means if there's a problem with a train, an engineer can take a picture of that and it automatically uploads that information into a Box folder where the provider of the trains, which in this case is Siemens, has access to that information. So if we have a train that's missing some component and it's critical or something like that, they know straight away what have they got to fix and how do they get out to that customer to resolve it. We've talked about the Uber one, AstraZeneca, another large customer for us, but interesting use case around that is that they share and work on a lot of their marketing campaigns and promotional campaigns around their drugs because they have a period of time of which they have the patent to go and sell that. So it's critical that they are monetizing as much as they can. Again, very good case of external collaboration. And Royal Dutch Haskening, don't know how much you know about them. They do build crazy things like nuclear power stations. So we've got massive projects there, disaster recovery, bridges. But I think it was New Orleans was one of the big cases where they were called in to help with that disaster, with that catastrophe. And by using Box, it meant that they could get their people on the planes and have the information readily available to them there and then. The old process would have been, right, we've got to send lots of documents to these guys because they're going to be working in a dangerous place. So health and safety, what do you do about building this back up, that type of thing. So it really does speed up that whole process, both from a customer experience, but also how your employees are working. So how to transform new styles of business. These are kind of talking about the key components to it. You know, it's key that if you are providing them with information or a content management tool, it needs to be instant information. You know, people want to know about that as soon as possible. They say that information, not currency, is the kind of key commodity of today. It's got to be easy use and it's got to be accessible anywhere. It's got to be a great user experience, because then people will want to use that and kind of drive the productivity. And it has to have the ability to build those suite of applications. It can't just be where you put information. You want to make sure that they can still use their core business applications that are integrated, in this particular case, to Box. And security is non-negotiable. You guys, everybody is very familiar with that those are the key things that people are looking at, making sure that it meets necessary compliance, but also it has that level of security that they're comfortable with. So you want to give the power to the users, but you want that to be in a controllable way. So who has what level of access to information, and does IT have the kind of backup privileges that if something does go wrong, then all of that information is auditable and they know where that information has gone. So hopefully with technology, I'm just going to give you an example, because I've talked about the use case of Eurostar, but it's better that you hear it firsthand from the customer.
My name is Antoine Gervillers and I'm Chief Information Officer at Eurostar in London. We operate 50 to 60 services every day between London, Paris and Brussels. Last year we carried more than 10 million passengers. About a year ago we did a study on the tools we have. Most of the things that came back from the study were the tools were difficult to use, difficult to access the information, and they were not accessible from anywhere but the office. Implementing Box addresses these three questions. It's much easier to use, accessible from anywhere, and it's easy to find content and to add content to the tool. At Eurostar we have approximately 1,700 employees. Everyone has access to Box. They're using Box everywhere. They're using Box in the office. They're using Box at our depot when we do the maintenance, where we do the maintenance of our trains. But also using Box on the trains, in the stations, on the platforms, everywhere. Most of our colleagues have responded very favorably to Box. People have been really happy, found it a modern and fast and easy solution. It's more the fact that people feel empowered to do their work. So it's used on corporate devices, so PCs, laptops, iPads, but then it can be used on anything. That's the point, was to make sure everybody could use Box from home to access documentation. So it's accessible on their mobile device, tablet and so on. It has enabled us to share documentation in a much more efficient and faster way. We don't start meetings making sure everybody has the latest version of the document, because the document is in Box. History of a document is very, very convenient, because you can revert to older versions. Search is so convenient. I mean, you can find documents anywhere. We have more and more people getting used to not printing. And we have lots of plans to integrate Box in existing systems. So we're doing some integrations with Salesforce, for instance. We're using Okta for authentication into Box. And we have an objective, which is to build a delightfully easy system. And it is a lot easier than what we had before. Box has become very critical to our business, because that's where we hold all our technical documentation, our driver instructions, and so on are now stored in Box. I'd say the single best thing about using Box, if I needed to isolate one, would be the fact that we trust that system. It's proven very reliable. Box allows me to concentrate on things that create value for our customers.
Great. So I think that the kind of key messages that came out of that, and it's one I haven't talked about, is very much empowering the individual, and that's what we're pushing and obviously making sure that we deliver through Box, wanting to be using the solution and feeling that they can use it in a secure and understandable way. And also it's just driving that transformation. It really has changed the way that Eurostar carry out a lot of their processes. So I'm just going to talk now briefly about how Box is allowing you to transform under these kind of main pillars. So the key, first one being around enabling new work styles. So what we're talking about here is that very much it's improving and enhancing that kind of remote work style and also the mobile worker. So not having access necessarily to a PC, but also to that mobile device, and access to any content through any application, because of those integrations that we talked about. Box actually has around, I think it's 1,500 different applications where the integration has already been built. So I talked about core ones being Office 365 and Salesforce, but the likes of DocuSign. So those are ready to go and you can be using those types of integrations. It's speeding up that collaborative process because it means that people have access to the right information to make those decisions much quicker. So key ones around that could be things like virtual deal rooms, collaborating with external suppliers, or even collaborating with your customers. And we're helping that digital transformation. Companies are driving that themselves, but we are very much a kind of core component when they're looking at that content management piece. And it's about digitizing processes. It could be some of the simple ones you see out there, every day, where banks are trying to provide you with more information electronically. Those are done through different types of content management solutions. Or it could be more of the complicated ones you see out there, which is actually, trying to improve the way that end customers are collaborating with different organizations. And that really touches on a point of how we're delivering that, which is something we call Box Platform. So this is actually where companies can build applications on top of Box, but using our core capability that's already built. So things like our search functionality, things like our preview API, that type of thing. And if you are looking at those types of things, I really do encourage you to come and sort of talk to our guys at the stand, and we can explain a bit more about that. But also behind that, it is key that you have the right security and compliance. So you're comfortable that it meets the compliance criteria and you're not going to get fired at the worst case for using this type of solution, but also making sure that you have the true transparency and auditability of that information. So Box gives you that. It monitors and registers every different interaction that happens, whether somebody's uploading, downloading a document, or doing more complex kind of structure and that type of thing. So I think, how am I doing time? Bang on. Okay, cool. So what I'll do, hopefully this works. I'm not going to play the last video. It's not even there anyway. Great. So thank you very much for taking the time to do that. Is there any questions? No? Good. Well, I really do encourage you, if you get time, come to the stand, talk to our guys. We've got Justin, Charles, Joe at the back of the room, and we can talk more about use cases and kind of any business challenges or initiatives you're looking to drive. Thank you.